It's probably one of the craziest endings in the National Football League's history, with teams with this kind of record, with everything on the line. And then you really talk about, what's going on throughout the season. I think Detroit has gotten a lot of credit, been dominant. The expectation has been there for them the whole season. But for the Minnesota Vikings, they haven't necessarily got the love. They haven't necessarily got the spotlight. And they've been right there keeping pace with them all season long. You don't talk about a lot of their guys. Jonathan Grenard is having a heck of a season. Van Gink, we bring up all the time, having a heck of a season. We talk about Addison and Justin Jefferson because obviously he's one of the best receivers in the National Football League. But Sam Darnold has done a phenomenal job. You saw the locker room elated when he comes in there, splashing him with water, putting him on their shoulders. This is a team that understands the moment, that has played hard, that has played well, executed well in very critical times in the game. And like we talked about off air, they're going to be 1-5 no matter what. These two teams are going to be the 1 seed and the 5 seed, whatever order they play in. And it's likely that a 14-win team that's a 5 seed will beat the 4 seed, regardless of circumstance. They'll likely get that win. So you're talking about a divisional rematch more than likely happening. That's pretty crazy. So you might get this in week 18 and then get this again in the divisional round, because that's probably how the wild card is going to shake out if the teams win that you record-wise do what they're supposed to do.
Richard, who do you think needs this win more? Because obviously the Detroit Lions, they're in desperate need of some rest, but the Minnesota Vikings, I think, need this game for national validation, right? I mean, you said it best. The Detroit Lions have been getting a lot of national spotlight with Minnesota relatively in the shadows. And I don't mean that it is any disrespect to Minnesota. They've certainly proved a lot of people wrong with the level of talent they have on this roster. But who do you think needs this win more, Minnesota or Detroit?
I think Detroit needs it more. I think Detroit needs it more because of what you talked about. They need rest. They need a chance to maybe get a player or two back from the IR, get a player or two back healthy, especially on that defensive side. I got to look through the roster, but getting 2 weeks off, at least a week off and then another week to potentially get some guys back would be a blessing for that team. And you just hope that that's enough to get them over the hump going into the divisional round, because they're so banged up on defense. The Minnesota Vikings have been rolling, but you're like you said, the Minnesota Vikings need it for another reason. That validation that, hey, we've been here the whole time. We've been playing well. And I know you guys see Sam Darnold as a Cinderella story, but at this point, he ain't Cinderella no more. Cinderella is a long time ago. They're here to stay, and they've proven that all season long. And defensively, Brian Flores looking for another head coaching job again. He's going to be up in those conversations again. He's found a way to get this defense humming, to get guys in position. They've played well in big games, divisional games. They just played well against the Green Bay Packers, getting pressure. Obviously, they gave up some points late in that game, but for the most part, there's nothing to complain about in Minnesota about how they're playing. They got a great team, and I look forward to seeing them perform in the playoffs.
One of the things that is very unique about Minnesota is the way they play defensively, and Brian Flores has brought a new tone to Minnesota, and their defense has set that standard for this team this season for sure. What is it that is so unique about the way Brian Flores schemes things up with this Minnesota defense?
Well, you just really never know where the pressure's coming from. And he brings it in very unique ways, unorthodox ways. A lot of times when they back out in the cover 2, but the few times they don't, it's zero coverage. And there's not a guy popping out. And you don't expect the guy to be bringing pressure from the side he's bringing it, or he's popping out 3 linemen instead of 3 linebackers, and the 3 linebackers are bringing the pressure. And so you gotta adjust for that, and you gotta prepare for so many different combinations of pressures. And I think that's something that he did with New England a lot, something he did when he was with the Miami Dolphins, and something he continues to do in Minnesota. And it's effective. It's effective because it's unconventional. It's not something quarterbacks see all the time. It looks a lot different on tape than it does in person. And these guys on the Minnesota Vikings defense are seem to be tailored made for this scheme. You talk about Van Gink having a great year, Grenard having a career year. Our guy Stephon Gilmore is still doing his thing at the cornerback position. Harrison Smith, same way. You got guys that are veterans who have played in this scheme and really are starting to are continuing to blossom, continuing to shine, and I love to see it.
Can we get a prediction? Who does Richard Sherman like to win this game, Vikings or the Lions?
I think the Honolulu Blue Boys get it done. I think Detroit wins this game. I think it's going to be a close game, and Kevin O'Connell and his staff have done well in close games. But again, Jared Goff and these boys are battle tested. They were just in another dogfight with a team that was just in the Super Bowl last season, and they held their own, more than held their own, scored 40 points in a ball game, and came out with a win. So I expect them to find a way to win this game, get some rest going into the divisional round of the playoffs, and come out and really make a run at the Super Bowl.
Well, Richard, with the 49ers and Seahawks now eliminated from playoff contention, I formally invite you onto the bandwagon of the Honolulu Blue Detroit Lions throughout this playoff run. You're free to join anytime, Rich. Let's shift the narrative a bit here, but we're going to keep talking about the Vikings because they played in a very tough game against the Packers, and we saw something come out of it that, unfortunately, their linebacker, Pat Jones, took an injury due to a Tucker Kraft low block. Richard, I know you always defend defensive players, and it seems to me like this block technique needs to be out of the game. Richard, first off, your thought on how to protect defensive ends and linebackers more when they're getting chipped at the line of scrimmage. Do you think those low blocks should be thrown out of the game?
Yes, I think they should be thrown out the same way they made the conscientious decision. You see the discrepancy and really the stark difference in which the league goes out of their way to protect offensive players with the rule in this game. You could see it in this game. There was a penalty called on Harrison Smith for chopping an offensive lineman where he didn't even chop him. He put his shoulder pads in his hip, stayed on his feet, like the guy pushed him to the ground. Okay, that's not what you mean a chop block is. And they called a flag, a 15-yard penalty, unsportsmanlike conduct, and move the ball down the field. And then on the other side, you have a guy, a tight end running full speed into a guy's knee, and you're saying, oh, that's just part of the offense. It's like does the world not see this? Does the world not see how skewed this is, how ridiculous it is for defensive players? And you talk about the safety of the game, it's frustrating. And it's very frustrating every single time that you see it because it's rarely as obvious as it is in those two plays. You look at the Harrison Smith play and you're like, that didn't look like a dangerous play. And you're not hearing many people get injured on that. Usually the linemen kind of jump over the guy cutting them and they both roll to the ground and the running back keeps going and it's just 1-for-1 and everything goes on. This play has been dangerous for a long time. And you're still not letting guys cut. You're not letting guys chop in there, and that's where it's frustrating. You got 330-pound linemen running into 180-pound corners who can't chop them, but you're telling me a tight end that weighs 260 running into a D end that weighs 270, he needs to cut him? No, stay up, be a man, and hit him. And the league needs to go correct that. They need to go fix that rule and make that illegal because it should not be legal in a tackle box or anywhere on the field. If you cannot cut offensive linemen as a corner, as an 185-pound guy cutting a 330-pounder, which would make sense in every bit of football, then got two guys that are like-sized, you shouldn't be seeing one of them run full speed into the other one's knee and that be a legal play. I'm sorry. At some point, you got to give the defense something. You got to protect us too. And I know the whole game is, hey, defensive players. Every time a guy goes to tackle somebody, you tell him, it's the defensive player's responsibility to keep the offensive player safe, which is always one of the most ridiculous things I ever hear. But you never hear it's the offensive player's responsibility to keep the defensive player safe. Tucker Kraft wasn't trying to keep him safe. He wasn't going to keep him safe. He wasn't protecting him. And it wasn't even a necessary crazy block. You could have hit him in his hip. You could have hit him in his hip like Harrison Smith did, moved him out of the way, and the hole would have been there. But again, from the outside and the public's view, offense can do no wrong. Hey, you hurt a defensive player, so what? Toughen up. Offensive player gets hurt, you're like, dirty! They're dirty! You see how dirty these defenders are? He rolled over his ankle. It's like, I tackled him. But stop the bullshit, man. I hate this part of the league. I really do.
I hate to tell you this, Rich, but Matt LaFleur disagrees with you. He called the block a totally legal play and said it was the same thing their guys were doing to our defensive ends. Richard, I'm with you, man. They got to take these types of plays out of the game because there's so much talent in this league, and the shame of it. And unfortunately, me being a homer Detroit Lions fan, you see it. You see what injuries can do, and they happen at random at any time. These types of plays that are totally unnecessary. This hit by Tucker Kraft was totally unnecessary and needs to be taken out of the game. Defensive players need to be protected more.